Greeting, listeners. It's time to wake up your career potential with another invigorating episode of Coffee with Convery. Today, we're in for a treat as we sit down with Jordan Berman, a global business executive and thought leader in building better workplaces. Jordan is the founder and president of Shift Advisory Group, a senior faculty member at Schulich Executive Education, and a lecturer at the Schulich School of Business. With extensive experience across multiple industries, Jordan has been a trusted advisor to C-suite executives on complex issues related to organizational culture, change, and communications. He is also the author of The Trust Trifecta, a book focused on fostering high-trust workplace cultures. Jordan's diverse backgrounds include working with multinational corporations, fast-growing organizations, family-owned companies, and public sector entities. Today, we'll be diving into the Jordan's insights on leadership development, organizational capabilities, and creating thriving workplace and cultures. Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Brian. Happy to be here.
It's great to see you today. We just want to start maybe with a few rapid fire questions so the audience can get to know a little bit about Jordan. So, what do you feel is your superpower?
My superpower, I would say it is making people feel comfortable very quickly.
I love that. I would say that actually meeting you and seeing that, you definitely make people feel comfortable. That's awesome. If you had to think about your something that makes you, I don't know, touches your senses, what is your favorite smell?
Oh, good question. Favorites? I'm gonna go old school because it's always, since I was a little kid, has always really made me feel good, which is fresh cut grass.
Ah, okay. Yeah, yeah.
You
I've had
know,
a couple of those. Yeah.
yeah, when it's green in the spring and everything's growing and it's, freshly rained and then it's cut. It's a very, I love it.
Yeah, totally, totally. I get it. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
I gotta go personal here and say being a great father.
Ah, I love that.
It's really
That's awesome.
important to me, and that's got to be one of the greatest compliments.
That's awesome. If you had to pick a favorite go-to snack, what would you say it is?
Oh God, potato chips. I'm more savory than sweet. Chips is yeah, potato chips for sure.
Not the chocolate, not the, no, savory.
No,
Yeah,
I do love chocolate, but I only need a little bit, Brian. But
yeah.
chips, I, I can eat a lot. That's the problem. So it's better not to have them around me. Any fried potato stuff, whether it's fries, chips, yeah, that's danger zone for me.
Okay. Thinking back to either high school or university doesn't necessarily matter, but what was your favorite subject in school?
I would say probably English, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I don't think I was particularly a good student in English. And ultimately, I went into communications as part of my career, so it's sort of ironic. But I would say that was my favorite. I know what my least favorite was,
What was
which was
that?
math.
Okay.
Which was math, which doesn't mean
Me
you all
too.
shouldn't focus on math because
Yeah.
it's really important. I just wasn't good at it, and we typically don't love things we're not good at. And so math was not, but English was, I would say, would be my favorite.
There you go. Yeah, for me it was math and accounting. I couldn't get through those courses.
Wasn't my language. Wasn't
Ugh,
my language.
no. But we need people that have those skills for sure. Um,
Absolutely.
Thinking back to first jobs, you all start somewhere. What was your very first job?
My first job was window cleaning, and
Ah,
I actually ended up having my own business as a 14-year-old till I was about 20.
wow.
So me and a friend worked for somebody for one season, one summer, and we realized they're getting most of the money and we're the ones climbing up the ladders and doing the work. Since it's a very low capital business, meaning we just need a ladder and some buckets, we should do it ourselves. And so the next summer we started and never looked back and loved it.
Nice, nice. Early entrepreneurial right there, spirit and approach.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would it be?
Oh, tough question. One word.
It can be hyphenated. I try
I,
to help.
I would say funny.
Funny. Yeah, I think that's good. I think Humor is a good thing to have in this world all the way around. So funny's good. I love it. Okay, so let's jump into your career and your experiences and insights on. I know that your career journey has included, roles in various industry and leadership positions. Thinking about some of the folks that are on this listening to this podcast, some students, recent grads, how important is it, do you think, to be open to different career paths, opportunities, and what should they consider when making these early career decisions?
I think it's incredibly important to be open. And the reason I say that is early on when you're just starting out, what you really want to do is have experiences, as many as you can, so that you not only get to understand what do you love, what are you passionate about, what are your strengths, but in what kind of setting. Do you like to work in a large organization or a smaller one? Fast paced or more predictable? Do you like being part of a team or do you like being an individual contributor? And so, what
Mhm.
I try to counsel young people is it's not just about the work, the tasks that you do, the title and the position, it's the environment. We spend a lot of time at work, and really understanding where you feel your best is really important.
Yeah, I think having that open-mindedness and that exploration mindset and curiosity, right, is so important. Because the world is changing so rapidly and these roles and careers are changing with it, right?
Well,
So,
there's so many more opportunities now in the workplace. And so I say if you've got an opportunity to seize it, even if it's for 3 months, even if it's a co-op or an intern, take that opportunity because you'll have experience, first of all, that you can share on a resume or with another employer. And also importantly, again, you'll understand, I really enjoyed this and this is why, or that wasn't for me. And now I understand I don't want to be in that kind of environment, that kind of sector, that kind of industry. So I think every experience, if you go into it with an open mind, has something to offer. And by the way, you'll also learn about kind of the kinds of people you like to work
mhm,
with, the kinds of people you don't. And all that is really important and will help you really find kind of the role of your dreams, if you will, and the place you want to work at.
absolutely. So you've obviously navigated multiple career transitions, and we know a lot of people that are also listening to this podcast may not be starting out, but maybe they're considering a transition or going into something new, feeling uncertain about that career direction, maybe considering a job in their field or study or another job altogether. What's your thoughts on those career transitions and what advice do you have there?
I think my thoughts on career transitions are they are wonderful opportunities if you can create them or seize them.
Mhm.
Meaning, I think at this point, and I have young adult children too, and young people today, part of the challenge is, yes, it can be tough to find a role sometimes, but in some ways there's so much opportunity. And so it's also hard to choose.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that I think young people, in my experience, sometimes feel like they have to choose something they're going to do forever. And I say that's not true. If you end up going to school and studying something, and halfway through the program, it's really not for you, you don't have to finish the program. And I'm not suggesting you don't get a degree or anything like that. I'm just saying you can switch gears even in school. And when you're out of school, let's say hypothetically you studied accounting or plumbing, a trade, whatever it is, and you start working and it's really not for you and you thought it would be different, that's okay too. You're not committed to it forever. I find that younger people, people starting out, put too much pressure on themselves to make a commitment for life. I went to school for this, I'm going to do this forever. And I say that's not true and it shouldn't be. And you should remove that pressure from you because you might start something and realize, you know what? I'm going to do this for a year or two, get some experience, but I now know I don't want to do this forever. And that's happened to me in my career. And so I made some changes and I made some choices. And I think it's a privilege and it's a unique opportunity. So I say stay open, don't worry about doing something forever. Just start to get those experiences to help you really refine what do you want to do? What are you good at? What really ignites you every day to get up and focus on work?
It's such great advice and insights, and I don't know what fuels this mindset of thou shalt stay in this career forever, thou shalt, but it's something that I don't know if we're taught it or what it is, but it
Well,
feels, what do you
I,
think?
I think I think part of it is social norms and upbringing,
Okay,
and
yeah.
depending on your culture and depending geographically where you come from, but just even your culture and your family and how your parents brought up, I think there's a lot of pressure. Sometimes it's implied by parents. We expect Brian to do this. Sometimes it's more subtle. I mean, growing up, I didn't have a ton of pressure, but I would say my parents strongly, particularly my mom, wanted me to be a lawyer. And it was something I was interested in. I wouldn't say it was my passion. And so that probably is evidenced by the fact that I never got into law school. But I think it comes in part for sure from our upbringing and our social norms. And I think there's also societal pressure, right?
Yeah.
So you have to, get a job and rent a place or find a condominium, or one day if you're able to buy a house. And like, how are you going to do that? It's by getting a job. And so if somebody has an opportunity in front of them to quote get a job that's secure and it's well paying, they're more apt to take it because
Mm,
something's better than nothing. And again, I think that's a great place to start. Just make sure if you're not happy, you don't stay there forever. Because you've probably met a lot of people, Brian, who've stayed enrolled far too long.
hmm.
They weren't happy. And
Yeah.
and yes, obviously a paycheck is important. We all have commitments, but your happiness is really important and your fulfillment, because work is an ends to a means. It allows us to live certain kinds of lifestyles, but it's not our whole identity by any means. So
So glad you shared that. So glad you shared that. I think it's so important about the happiness factor, and you can find happiness if you're in an opportunity and a passion that you like. So, yeah, thank you so much. So,
okay.
I wanted to jump a little bit, shift gears a bit to an experience you had. And when you think about, navigating crisis management and having resilience through different challenges, you were at a time you were the vice president of global corporate affairs, business transformation, and strategic planning at Apotec. Is that how you say it? Apotex?
Appetites.
Apotex, sorry. And the company faced significant challenges, including the tragic loss of its founders. How did you maintain that resilience and focus during that immensely difficult period? And what did you learn from that you might be able to share with the listeners about leading through a crisis of magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the murder of our founder and his wife in their home in their 70s was an unprecedented, never could imagine horrific tragedy and
Mm,
scenario. And it's just not a crisis you could ever be prepared for. And I have managed other crises, never on this scale, never with the kind of global interest there was from stakeholders and media all over the world. I think on the resilience and focus part of the first part of your question, part of it, to be honest with you, was just sort of natural instinct, meaning I recognized that people were looking to me
mhm,
for direction and
mm,
support about how to navigate the company through this. And being in communications, a lot of sort of crisis management falls to people with this kind of expertise. And so part of me realized instantly that there was an expectation for me to step up. So I'm not sure I had a ton of time to think about sort of resilience and focus. I think the circumstances and the sense of urgency and the sensitivity, the fact that this was our founder and his wife, all played into my ability to really focus. I think the second part of your question, interestingly, I held a full day workshop yesterday on crisis management communications. I mean, the strategies were what one might think would be obvious, which is you have to be proactive in making decisions about who needs to know what and when, to think about your employees first, but also all the other people who have a vested interest in the crisis, in understanding what it means for them. So at Apotex, we had customers, we had retail
mhm,
customers, we had institutional customers, we had suppliers that we bought stuff, we had people we sold stuff to. We had all hundreds and hundreds, government. And so we had to, think about all of those stakeholders and then make sure that we had a plan, that we had people reaching out in whatever channel seemed the most appropriate for that relationship and that stakeholder to reassure them, let them know what we were doing, what we knew, when they would get an update. So the strategies are be proactive, make decisions quickly. But when you start communicating, it's really sharing everything you can, giving as
Hmm.
much context as you can. And look, we didn't know a lot right out of the gates. We
Right.
found out through the media. I got a message from the Globe and Mail that Friday asking me to confirm it. And that was the first I had heard of it. And so
Wow.
it wasn't like the police contacted us. So, yeah, I mean, it's really about being proactive and making quick decisions, thinking broadly, and also in this particular case, but most crises, is empathy, is recognizing that you can feel bad about something. I know some organizations struggle with
Hmm.
apologies and acknowledging because they're worried about liability, but I don't think that precludes you. In fact, I know it doesn't, from being empathetic, from being a human and saying, we feel really bad about what's taken place. Um, and so I think you have to manage expectations. Here's what we know. Here's what we know about why it happened, how it happened. And if it's a crisis that your organization caused, here are the steps we're taking to address it and hopefully prevent it in the future.
Thank you for sharing such a personal and close to the heart story with the listeners. And I really like what you said about empathy and showing that human emotion, even in communications and conversations. It's it goes so much further than trying to be, let's say, corporate about it, right?
Well, I always say to your point, Brian, facts and stats, data or information have a place,
Yeah.
particularly in a crisis, but in general, but they're not emotional, and human beings are emotional by nature. And so I say, facts and stats are important to some degree. What's more important is how do you connect with people? How can you say something that resonates with them? And I find that in general communications and even crises, and you've seen lots of examples where it was handled poorly, that
Hmm.
organizations make it about themselves versus the people who have been harmed in some kind of way, either physically, mentally, financially. They don't make it about the persons or organizations that have been impacted. And that's the empathy part. It's not about you, it's about what's been caused for other people.
Key thoughts, sir. Thank you very much for that. As founder of your Shift Advisory Group, talking about workplace cultures, which is, I think, a good transition here, is it's on the top of minds for everyone when they look at joining organizations or transitioning, as we talked about earlier. And sometimes it's not the most easiest thing to figure out or navigate, but what is your vision on how to maybe think about maybe some of the employers listening to this too, about what's your vision for transforming some of these workforce cultures to be better enabled, I guess.
Well, like many of your listeners, I've worked in organizations that have really strong, sort of healthy leadership and workplace cultures. And unfortunately, I've worked for leaders in organizations that had very toxic cultures. And so the benefit, if you will, of that is I've seen what works, what creates a positive workplace for people to kind of do their best work. And we know that really healthy workplace cultures are not just important so people enjoy working there, but when you have a highly engaged workforce, it leads to better financial results.
Mhm.
That's not me saying it, that's decades of research from many different organizations. There's an absolute concrete link to highly engaged workforces and better financial results or better performance results. And so for me, my vision is kind of simple, to be honest with you. It starts with leadership. Leadership doesn't own culture, but it sets the tone. And so I do a lot of leadership coaching, both with individuals and teams, helping them understand the impact that they have. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean executives,
Mhm.
managers, anybody who leads people. I do think anybody can be a leader, so it's not about that. But when you lead people, your impact obviously is greater. The more people that you manage, the more impact you can have. And so I start with leaders for
Mhm.
sure. And then we start with the things that make up culture. How do we communicate in the culture? How do we get stuff done? What are our processes like? People tend to think about cultures as just behaviors, which is part of it. But let me give you one example, and you would
Mhm.
appreciate it. If you think just about the recruitment of an employee, that's
Mhm.
really where your culture should start being reflected. Where do you advertise? What kind of employee trade shows do you show up at? How do you talk about your organization? When you
Hmm.
actually post an ad, what does the ad say? What are the interview questions like when a candidate comes in? What
Yep.
happens when they actually join? What's the onboarding like? Do all these things reinforce the culture that you say you have or that you want to have? And so for me, it starts with leaders, but it's a holistic view about your values, the way you communicate, and the way stuff gets done in an organization.
So key, and I'm glad you brought up recruitment as an example because I really feel recruiters and talent acquisition folks are really your sales force and marketing group to actually bring new clients in the form of an employee into the environment. And when we don't treat it like that and we treat it as more transactional, we're actually starting off on a bad foot, like you said, right?
That's
It's it.
really well said. That's really well said. And I think you're right. The vast majority of organizations I've worked with or consulted look at it the exact same way as you said, which is transactional. We have a
Yeah,
role, we can find someone to fill the role, and they're not intentional about, again, does this candidate reinforce and do they subscribe and will they add something to the culture that we're trying to emulate or trying to evolve or that we currently have? And, for people applying for roles, the other part I think that's really important, I want to underscore that you asked in your question is how do they determine what the culture is? And I always
right.
say, and I mean, you're the expert advising students on polls and others, but I always say have a couple of thoughtful questions pre-planned that you can ask about culture and but specific focus questions, not tell me about your culture, not just open-ended ones, but if I ask three people in different parts of the organization at different levels, what are three words they would use to describe your culture? Like be very
Perfect.
specific,
Yeah.
forces them to be thoughtful and describe it. Because when you say describe the culture, people will say, well, we're collaborative, we like to have fun. And it
We're
doesn't really,
family.
we're family, exactly. So it doesn't give the prospective candidate enough to go on. And it's an important part of, should be an important part of your choice, whether or not to join an organization.
Yeah. Super insightful. I think we might need to have a part two podcast or go on tour, you and I, and talk about this because it is a big deal.
Absolutely.
And so many don't think of it in that way. And I constantly, I know I'm defending what I do, but it's so important to make that connection and it's your brand. And people walk away, even if they don't get the job, they'll walk away with that perspective and view of your culture, whether you like it or not. So make
And
it
they'll
make it a
talk
good
with
impression.
other people. And they'll
Oh
talk
gosh, yeah.
about other people, right? And so to your point, maybe that wasn't the candidate, or maybe they chose not to take the job, but they have a whole network of people. And to your point, they're going to share their experience. And that
Absolutely.
could either positively impact your future recruitment efforts, or it could compromise your ability to attract the talent that you want.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you talked about values a bit, and I'm a big believer in values that when it comes to talent, and talent navigating cultures and corporations and nonprofits or wherever they want to end up working. I always tell young people and other people like stay true to your values, make sure you know what they are. Um, how, in your experience, can a person align their values with the demands and the culture of the workplace? Any thoughts?
That's a great question, Brian. You know, I would say just never compromise them.
Uh-huh.
And
Yep.
I know that sounds sort of easy because it's for me not, yes, it's about alignment. It's more about what you said. Really understand what's important to you and what your values are and never compromise them. The moment you compromise your values, even for a job, is the moment that you're taking part of yourself and giving it up.
Yep.
That's really, really intrinsically valuable to you. And so I have not done that. And I have left roles because I felt increasingly that my values are being compromised. And
Mhm.
so I wouldn't put myself in that position. And I don't think anybody should. You're never going to feel good about staying there after you've done it. You're never going to feel like rewarded for having done it. There's no gain if you take your values and you compromise them, there's no gain. I do think to your point on alignment that it's important to understand the values of an organization before
Mhm.
you join to see
Yep.
if they match up with yours. And it may not be the exact same words, but is the sentiment, is the essence of what they believe is important? Is it what you believe that's important? And if it's not, that's okay too, by the way. But that might raise a bit of a flag for you to say, you know what? I'm not really sure that's the thing that I value most. I place greater emphasis on this versus that. And that's
True,
something you should think about.
true, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit of networking. Always an interesting topic for job seekers and career people looking for different changes. Um, Again, back to having a human approach to it is something that I always advise. Like, don't think of it as just building a list of contacts. Think of it about building relationships. But how have you seen, or maybe people that don't have much experience in building these kind of networks, maybe it's also cultural. They come from an environment where that's not what they were taught. Um, any experience on your thoughts around networking and building those relationships?
Yes, start doing it.
Yeah.
But I'll be more specific. Look, there are lots of ways to network. Your school, and if you're at a university level, they may have an alumni network. I know I've joined York University where I was a graduate and they have a number of options that you can offer to mentor or network or have calls with people. So I've done that as my small way of trying to give back. So you should look for opportunities to join that because they have
Hmm.
built in and invested some infrastructure. But I would also say, if you can and you feel confident, is to reach out cold calling. And when I mean cold calling, you can go on LinkedIn or other, but I would say a professional network and send a message to someone and say, hi, I've read your profile. I'm just starting out in my career. Would you be able to find 15 minutes to meet with me to talk about X and be specific? I meet with people probably once a week, at
Okay.
least maybe once every 2 weeks. The vast majority I don't know. I've never met them. They don't come through somebody I know. They reach out on LinkedIn. I try to find time because I've been fortunate to have received a ton of support in my career. And so I find time. And so,
Yeah.
when people know what they want to talk about, it's great. But, I've had people reach out to me, for example, and say, I'd like to meet with you. It's about a career transition. I'm doing this. I want to do that. That's clear enough. So I say, great. And then I get on the phone and they're like, I want to move into strategy. How can I do that? And then that really is a bigger conversation. What do you mean by that? What, are you talking about a role? Are you talking about the work? So the more you can be clear about what you're
Sure.
asking from someone, it's going to respect their time, but it'll also allow them to give you what you need. But I would reach out. I would, to your point, socially, culturally, sometimes it's not comfortable. The worst thing that can happen is somebody says no or they don't respond. And I
Right.
increasingly I find a lot of people who've been around for a little while, like yourself and myself, we are willing to meet with people who are going through a career transition or just starting out.
Absolutely. And I think what you said there is really important to highlight is the idea of networking and making it human, but then with purpose, right? Because I find the same thing. I'll get somebody who sends me a connection, and even I want to be part of your network. Well, I'm not sure. That's not something I'll probably respond to. I mean, what does that mean? And then with the purpose or the direction, like you said, strategy, will go deeper because otherwise everyone's time is valuable, and you could spend just 20 minutes deciphering what the question was versus what the
Right.
advice, right?
Exactly.
So I think that
No,
that's great
exactly.
points.
And I would have just one more thing, Brian. I would
Sure.
add, when you talk about purpose, and most people know this, but the idea of networking is to build a network. That is a large number of people that could identify opportunities for you, refer you to someone else to talk to,
Yeah.
just give you something to think about. It's not about finding a job, right?
Right.
And so when you're networking, you're just trying to build somebody.
Yes.
You and
I
I
love
met
that.
through networking.
Yeah.
Now you have your podcast. We've talked offline about some stuff. That's what it's about. And so, again, people, just to your point, I want to underscore it. It's about purpose. Why do you want to meet with somebody? Is it to learn more about their career trajectory, what they did in a specific role? How do you break into an industry? Try to be as clear as you can about why you're reaching out.
I love that. Thank you so much for that insight. And one thing I'll add to it to pile on too is that, like, you're right, the job can be an outcome of the conversation, but it shouldn't be the reason you're meeting,
Right.
right? I think that's really important. And I could tell you some of the reach outs I've gotten as far as even like, do you have a job for me? Well, that's really open-ended. But anyways, good conversations on this topic because I think there's a lot of good information here for people to hear and action and maybe think a little differently. I want to talk about your book, The Trust Trifecta. You focus on high trust workplace cultures. Super important. Can you share an example, maybe, of how you successfully built trust during a particular time in your career? Maybe some lessons learned that our listeners could learn from.
Sure. You know, um, when I started at one organization, I knew that I would need to make some substantial changes to how things were going to be done in the area I was hired for. And I also knew through the interview process that the person that I would be supporting and reporting into, which was the president, that they were very conservative in their approach to
Yeah.
communication, that they were the kind of person that didn't like to have a lot of, I would say, unstructured dialogue. They'd like to have a little more predictability about who was going to say what. And this was important because while I had a lot of ideas about what I wanted to do, one way I built trust was recognizing where they were coming from. So
Mm,
listening to their concerns actually informed and shaped how I approached introducing these new things. And the biggest thing was the cadence, the timing, and the pace. So I
absolutely.
didn't come in out of the gates and say, I'm going to do 50 things and they're going to dramatically change and disrupt how we do things. I started with one little idea, which they were on the fence about even. I said, let's just try it one time even. Let's not commit to doing it on a quarterly
Hmm.
basis. So a big part of fostering trust is listening, asking questions, and being patient. And then, of course, they're the table stakes, which I call them. You know, your credibility, your integrity, your
Hmm.
accountability. You know, when you say you're going to do something, do you do it? Your
Right.
reliability, you know, your competence. Are you prepared? You know, it's hard to trust somebody when they're ill prepared. You're not sure you have the confidence they know what they're talking about. In my book, I talk about three other things I'll quickly mention, which is consistency. You
Hmm.
know, saying one thing and then behaving a different way, that's not a way to build trust because it raises a question, right? Brien said this is really important. Then I saw him go and do this. That doesn't add up for me. When people aren't honest or transparent,
Right.
right? When they don't know where they stand, you're not giving them the full truth. And then finally, I talk about authenticity, which is really about being who you are. Don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry about having all the answers. Show some humility, show some vulnerability. That's how you connect with people. And a big part of trust is all about this, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
screen to screen or face to face, it's a connection. And how we relate to people, how we talk with them, and how we listen with them is how you foster trust.
So important in so many levels and so many conversations we have and relationships. Thank you so much for highlighting that more. And again, the book is The Trust Trifecta if people want to take a look at that and dive deeper into your thoughts and insights there. So thank you so much. I could I love talking with you. Like it's such a conversational opportunity and I'm learning and my head's going like things they're saying. It's just going off fireworks in my head about different ideas and things to run with. Is there anything that we didn't talk about or ask you that you maybe want to share with the audience or our listeners as we start to look at wrapping this?
I don't think there's anything I want to share because I think your questions now will give you some mutual admiration. I also really enjoyed this. I
Thank you.
think, you know, your questions were very insightful. I think add a lot of value to, you know, younger people, people earlier in their careers thinking about how to approach it. And I think this is super valuable. And I hope there's lots of listeners to it because I think the kinds of questions you ask should provoke some more
Mhm.
thinking and analysis and intentionality around how people approach their careers, how they think about networking or approach their first job, or whether they should take this experience. So I don't have anything to add other than to reiterate something you asked at the beginning, which is advice for younger people. And I would just say be open.
Yeah.
Be open to opportunities, even if they're not exactly what you want at a given time. or the right money or the right duration. You want full time, but it's only a 6 month contract. Just be open to it. Every experience will leave you with valuable practical lessons you can take away, things that you learned which are great and you want to model and duplicate and repeat, and things you saw that you don't want to be part of again, or you personally as you grow in career don't want to emulate. So be open and seize those opportunities.
Perfect. Jordan, thank you so much again for being a part of the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on and looking forward to our future conversations together.
Really appreciate your time. Thanks for the invitation, Brian.
You're welcome. So, for the listeners, if you liked what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network. You can find us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. You can give us a rating, and then other than that, you can also follow us on Instagram. Coffee with Convery has all of the podcasts listed there over the years, and you can find something that might interest you and take a look. This has been Coffee with Convery, where we show you success isn't always about climbing the corporate ladder. Sometimes it's about building your own jungle gym. Thanks again.